Plot: Blue, 1993. Written by Michael Brook. Against a plane. On Changing Blue screen. A densely interwoven soundtrack of voices, sound effects and music attempt to convey a portrait of Derek Jarman's experiences with AIDS, both literally and allegorically, together with an exploration of the meanings associated with the color blue. Voiceover off.
When you're blind and watching movies, what will you find? A blind superhero whose superpowers are acting like he's not blind. A sighted actor over dramatically touching people's faces. Or maybe the whole joke is that they're bumping into different places. A spectacular, macular generation. Tunnel vision to your television. And do they off this movie with audio descriptions? They're movie buffs who know their stuff. You'll be thoroughly entertained. Join Sky and Melissa throughout film history and Citizen White Cane.
Hello.
Hi.
And welcome to Citizen White Cane, the podcast that sees red when watching Mr. Magoo and sees blue when watching this week's movie. My name is Sky McLeod.
I'm Melissa Bukta.
And we watched the 1993 film Blue this week. Yeah, this was my choice. It was a movie that I learned about actually in film school. Yes, I went to film school in my queer cinema class, but I actually saw it on my own because I wanted to see it because it is, I was like, oh, blindness represented on screen. Very great. I love that. And so then I watched it on my own, and then I had you watch it again this week. So what, I don't know, what are your first just kind of like summary takeaways from having seen it for the first time?
Well, I mean, first of all, and not to just start out with blatant hyperbole, but Blue is a masterpiece. Absolutely no questions asked. It joins a very short list of movies I've watched in my time on this earth. That when they ended, I just hit play and watched the entire thing again.
Whoa.
Or in this case, listened to the entire thing.
That's so because you hadn't, when we, just a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, but we recorded, because I'm about to go on a trip, the last week's episode, Scent of a Woman, yesterday. And when we had talked, you had not watched the movie yet. And so we, in the less than 24 hours since we recorded the last episode, you saw it two different times.
Yes, I've watched it twice. I watched it twice.
That is, I mean, that is some real, dedication to the podcast. Now, you are very coming in real fresh having seen this movie.
I mean, it is a meditation on life as much as it is a meditation on death. It's a meditation on what it's like to have and live with AIDS. Although the director might scoff at the sentiment "living with AIDS,"
right?
But it centers on his last month or years of life, basically.
Right, because it came out September of 1993, and Derek Jarman, who directed it and wrote it and all that, I think passed away in February of 94, only a few months, or might have been April. I don't remember exactly, but it was like he was alive, I think, for another like 6 months at the most after the film was released. So he did get to see it, well, the movie, to get into it. Derek Jarman, in the end of his life, was going blind from complications from HIV/AIDS, which, I mean, I guess everything that comes from HIV/AIDS is technically not the disease itself, but other things. But he had very little vision and talked about only seeing things in shades of blue, which hence the purpose of the movie being an all blue screen for the entire film.
Right. I sorely wish that there were more movies like this. I wish that this became a style of filmmaking, and I suppose the closest thing that I can compare it to is soundscapes, because that's what it is. And I've had a little bit of experience making them, because we did them for my radio production class. We all had to make soundscapes, and they were some of the most fun projects I ever had. Collecting the sound is fun, and editing it together so that it flows and you can tell a story, and you just don't need vision to see it, or to experience it. And I know this is all coming from two people who are not deaf, and who still have we still have our hearing. Right. So I can't say that a soundscape is a definitive way to tell a story, and there are so many other ways, but man, I love it. I love it. And the sounds in this movie, I experienced the highest highs and the lowest lows. I mean, I felt exalted and felt like I was flying. And then, especially when you get to the medical stuff and just the way it's described and the sounds he uses, it just makes my stomach turn. It made my skin crawl, to be honest.
Yeah, it is pretty, like, a lot of the stuff. Yeah, it is kind of almost like you do think of it in, like, the metaphors of high and low. Like, there is stuff about the sky, it being an all blue screen and, like, floating and all these things. And then, the most grounded, like, stuff that is so bodily and, like, and medicalized, and, like, but also coming from, just literally a lot of it was just from his diaries that he wrote in the hospital. So it was just coming directly from that, like, literally that place. And also being in the center of a pandemic, basically, that was affecting, all of your loved ones. And even, I think for people who survived that time, even, it's just, like, a very traumatizing, really, like, to just watch everyone in your life die, or a vast majority of them. And even as you're sick, dealing with the loss and also, your sickness at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, Derek talks about losing his friends, and that, I think that was one of the main, there was tons of things that will stick with me forever, but one of the things that definitely stuck with me forever is when he was talking about his friends that he died or that had died, and you just hear their names over and over and echoed again throughout the movie. First, they feel very solid, and then they get further away and further away, and then they're just kind of wind, and they just blend into the soundscape, almost like they're being absorbed by everything around them. He talks about your body slowly turning to stone, and but your mind is fine. He talks about his mind being as bright as a button, and yet the physical being that encapsulates it is slowly rotting away, basically. And how his friend, I can't remember which friend it was, but his friend who's very bright, and then calling him on the phone during his last days, and it's just groans. It's because that's all he can make out. I mean, there are so many ways I don't want to die, but this is the worst way.
I thought, like, this was kind of an interesting time to be watching this movie. Kind of, 93 was almost kind of in a similar, if you're looking at, like, especially the HIV/AIDS epidemic, like, in the US, like, this, I was thinking about, parallels to now, but, like,
right, well, how can you not?
Right, of course, yes. But, like, coming out of that was at a time where there was technically hope on the horizon, but I think you really can only know that in retrospect, because it was still a few years off from, like, a lot of the stuff that really saved lives. Started in, like, the mid-90s. This was at a time where it was the death sentence in a way that it just isn't today, and it wasn't even 10 years after the movie was made, but it is that point of both, like, watching it from the retrospective, like, this is something that now just is a very different disease. It can be totally treatable now, and there's a lot of people who live with HIV for long, happy lives, except for other than the stigma that it still it carries. But, and I think in a lot of ways the stigma has been dangerous the whole time. It was dangerous because there was no treatments when this movie was made, and it's dangerous now because it makes people less likely to get the treatments that do exist because of the stigma. So that's just to say, because I don't know, it's just something I think about a lot when talking about this, and I wanted to give some context to that as well, because it is something that is very treatable now, but it just destroyed an entire community, a generation. It's
so interesting for me, for someone who was born in 87 and was a child in the 90s, and all of this was happening around me. And granted, I didn't really know or come into my sexuality until I was much, much, much older. So my parents, we just definitely were not in that culture. We were so far separate from what was going on in the LGBTQ community. So to go back now and watch all these documentaries like I Survived a Plague, or How to Survive a Plague. Yeah. And heck, even Rent and books and journals and just all of this Angels in America, theater, all of this archived knowledge that we have access to now. It's incredible. And to think, geez, I was here on this earth but had no idea that any of this was happening.
Yeah. It's funny. For me, I have in some ways sort of a the inverse of that experience of because I was born when the year this movie came out, but most of my life HIV has been something that is very treatable, but my mom lost so many of her high school friends. She was during the epidemic at its height, she was the right age, and was mainly did theater and had primarily queer male friends, and so she every time she'll hear someone's name and credits or something, she's had many experiences of being oh my gosh, it's this person from high school or college, and then finding out that they are dead, or there'll be a dedication to that person, and that so many of the in that kind of loss is, I think, for those who survived that, or for whatever reason, but I think that it's something that it's just to think about having so much of your social group just dead, before they got to really live their life and I think it's something that you carry around with you. So there's a weird almost I wonder, I have a weird epigenetic kind of response to anything that deals with HIV/AIDS of oh my gosh, the amount of loss that was from those communities. So that's kind of my background in a way, kind of a different complete other angle of it. But and my mom is also lived in New York and whatnot, so kind of in places where they're famously the epidemic ravaged. Though this film is British, so kind of we learn a lot of the US history, and I realized I don't actually know as much of the British history of exactly how they reacted to the epidemic, and I just mostly know it through the US history lens.
I mean, you could say it looks from the sound of the film, maybe they treated the people and the epidemic with a little bit more civility, and it wasn't so much about people having to hide and people being scorned, but that's just not true.
It seems exactly the same.
The British LGBTQ community was going through the same nightmare that the US was going through. Just people, it was swept under the rug, or people were demonized because they were gay and they got the disease.
Right. Yeah. It is still, and it's still, I mean, honestly, it really is frustrating and awful, but it's not like some of the aspects of that have not changed, even though now there's more research into treatment, and like that is the thing that's changed, but there's still so much stigma. And for people even within like the queer community, like for people who are HIV positive, the amount of stigma that you face, and you know, you get like, it's not what it used to be. And so it is also now a lot more, there's so many like treatments, and it's about getting people access to those treatments, but the stigma remains, and that at this point is probably the most like, you know, dangerous part of HIV AIDS right now, is just the stigma, like that is the thing that hurts people the most. Like it is really I think it's hard to like talk about these historical things, and then also like, because it's a weird contextual thing of like the history of it was so like, the problem was in a way there was the same problem, but it was also like super different, because you had like, it was just about getting this acknowledged and like getting the medical establishment to take it seriously as a real condition, whereas now it is more that it's seen as like, oh, it is so, you know, like it is so deadly, as opposed to like, people see it as something that's so deadly, and that they don't like, that you can't be around people with HIV, or you know, that you don't to not date people who have HIV, and like it's just carries this stigma that, you know. And I think it's really, when I hear people who talk about being positive, like now, it reminds me a lot of just like, you know, just the ableism that we experience, you know, just ableism. Like it is just it is a really strong ableism, but it's a kind of ableism that also like it makes, it's like a added moral judgment of like, you know, there's something like both wrong with you for getting this thing, but also like there's on top of like how something like blindness, you know, no one's worried they're going to catch our blindness. But then there's also like that added kind of the added stigma that comes with anything that is to some extent transmissible, even if like it's not, even if there are many ways for it to not be transmissible. It's still, that carries that extra stigma that you could, even with like COVID and stuff, it kind of has parallels that, just in that like the way that we, you know, especially like talking like with the hate crimes towards the Asian communities, or like Chinese communities in the US, and you know, this idea that people are bringing a disease with them, and like that kind of like moralizing of people who are already suffering. Anyway.
And the film, it's interesting because the film definitely plays out, because you said journal entries, and it definitely plays out like a series of really good journal entries. It doesn't necessarily have a plot, but it does have a very steady flow to it. And I kind of sort of divided it, was mentally trying to make chapters or division points in my head. Oh, in this section we talked about this and this and this, to try and sort of like grab onto something that I could hold on to, some kind of system of I don't know, rigidity or something that I could that would keep me afloat.
Did you like come up with like specific like I mean, like, because I think there are a lot of the, as we were talking about before, like the kind of like in the hospital and like different medical scenes, and then there's also the, you know, scenes relating to the gay club scene in London during the time that Derek Jarman was like, you know, in like 60s and 70s, where when he would have been like in his 30s, I think. So like that, that's part of it. And then there's also like these like the color blue is a character. That comes up too. And I really dug all of just the absolute abstract scenes and pictures that I saw in my head. I mean, yes, the color blue coming into all of these different scenes, the color blue and within the yellow scene, which is one that really stuck out in my head, because I interpreted the character Blue finding Vincent van Gogh in the beginning of the scene.
because he talks about sunflowers wilting in a pot and Yellow sitting in a chair, and I don't know why, but Vincent van Gogh's life just kind of, the end of his life kept sticking in my head. And maybe that was what one aspect that could be playing out. But I loved the image of Marco Polo sitting on the lapis throne over the blue mountains. I loved how he used the choir sounds. I mean, not gonna lie, I'm a sucker for a good choir. I just love, I love that, like everybody, the tones and everybody being in harmony, and the so many voices. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff, those kind of sounds. But the stuff about the Buddha and walking away from illness, and then to have the choir intone that mantra.
Yeah.
Maybe and I was trying to figure out why that's there, because obviously he knows he's not going to just walk away from this illness, but maybe it was something someone told him and it just got stuck in his head, and he raised it to this ethereal, unreachable place.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think there's like, I was watching an interview with him in 93 talking about the film, and it was kind of, I think for me, I was like struck most by just the calm, like a kind of a calmness that he had about talking about, you know, like, you know, this was so close to the end of his life, and he had been going through this for a long time, and had, you know, was had lost his vision, but also, like, you know, was constantly in and out of the hospital. But there was just kind of a, like, I think, I don't know, there was just some sort of like feeling of kind of accepting that, like, I don't have really great words for it either, but like, just I think of it as being, there is kind of, does have a sort of like a feeling of like a Buddhist teaching of just, it also relates to something at the end where he talks about how everyone's, I think it's at the end, where he's talking about how all the voices of him and the people in his lives will be lost to history. And it just, all of that kind of in my head tied together of being kind of, what is the right way to, just a lack of permanence in anything, I guess, would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, our lives to us can seem long, but in the grand scheme of things, our lives on this earth are so short, and it's, as far as the universe is concerned, we are specks of dust, and our existences are lived in a blink of an eye. But and yes, it is about acceptance and coming to terms with mortality and with this virus that is, it will kill him. That is what's going to happen. But because he took the time to sit down and make this piece of art and record his friends' voices and record what they said to him and talk about how he feels and about his vision, this will live for as long as it can be archived. I mean, we're looking back at it now. We are hearing his words right now. That's kind of amazing. And even though he's not here with us, we can still look inside this small blue window of history and experience his thoughts.
No, I think that's, I thought the same thing, like hearing that part of it as well, is like, the fact that, like, though that is true, it is also not true to some extent.
Right.
Of like there being like that, this, you know, recorded history of this. And I mean, maybe in 1993, maybe that there was more of like this, you know, I think that this film was in some ways not given its due because it was such an experimental thing, which I mean, it's interesting because it was also broadcast on the BBC radio, like, as well as on TV, and it was also had a release like in theaters. But for me, like, thinking of it as a radio play, I don't think that it has the same. I think that to me cheapens it a little bit personally. Like, I think that to experience it, it should be in its form as a visual medium. I mean, if you are someone with any vision at all, with any light perception, I do think that the best way to, but he signed off on it being broadcast on both, but I personally just think that it works better with, But what do you think?
Well, in the opening credits, I did notice that it was co-produced with BBC Radio 4 or 3, one of them, but BBC Radio. So that got me wondering, what is this going to feel like? Is this going to feel like a movie? Is it going to feel like a radio play? And then the movie starts, and it's just this big, beautiful blue box, basically on my phone. Essentially, I didn't really need to watch it on a big screen, and maybe I don't know, maybe I should have. But for the first maybe 10 minutes, I did look at the blue screen, and I would put my phone down and listen, and then I'd pick my phone back up because I kept thinking, maybe something's going to happen. Maybe something's going to happen, even though I knew nothing was going to happen. But I eventually finally just put my phone down.
Interesting.
And just listened, because I mean I'm that weirdo who falls asleep to like soundscapes and ASMR and stuff. So I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and listen to this. But it's also interesting because or fascinating, because he is, someone who is losing his vision, completely lost his vision, and all he can sense and see now is blue. And he makes this movie that might be seen by other blind people, and maybe these other people have no concept of blue,
right?
Of that color, which becomes so important, and he becomes so fascinated with. So then the question is, can you watch this movie and get the same out of it as a totally blind person who's never seen the color blue or can't perceive that?
Yeah.
I think you can. I think he's done it so well that blue, to me, sounds ethereal. I loved all the use of the singing bowls and the wind chimes, if that's what those instruments were. But those particular instruments, I mean, just because I personally like those sounds. I like the round, big tones of them. But that became blue in a sense. I mean, it's just the scenes he sets up, the butterflies and the cornflowers, the delphiniums. I don't necessarily know what those look like exactly, cornflowers and delphiniums, but I've seen cornflower petals before, and they are this bright, deep shade of blue. And but I don't necessarily think that you need to see or perceive blue to have this movie impact you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is an interesting thought, because there are some of the things because my color vision is there but not great, so I don't have a lot of color associations with things that aren't like, explicitly this color. Like, colors are just kind of random to me. They'll kind of show up sometimes in a way that sort of that other people can sort of say they're seeing the same color as I am, but then a lot of times I'll see different colors, or they're kind of all over the map. So I feel like some of the talking about the different colors was, for me, I was like, I don't know what color that is. Like, there was a lot of things that I think were kind of like what you're saying, like, or kind of, thinking about. But I felt, actually, for me, what was so powerful was getting to watch the screen, and I had my giant monitor on, and I think that, like, that being able to unfocus my eyes and watch something and spend the entire time looking at the blue screen, for me, I think was my favorite part of having that, the color as the focal point, because I think also just the fact that allowed me to see the color, because the bigger something is for me, the more likely I'm to be able to perceive it as a color. And so having that kind of just being a way of watching a film, but like having it feel like I was having visual information, but it was not the kind that can be taxing, or the kind that can kind of make it hard for me to know what's going on or focus on things or feel like I'm missing out on something, but to be able to fully immerse myself in a visual but still feel very like, like I'm getting the whole thing, like I'm getting the whole picture, it's just like, I think that is what I really love about it. But it would be actually, I wonder if like, I like that we have two very different ways of like relationship to how we watched it. I wonder, like, for a sighted person, do you think it's more important if a sighted person watches this film? Do you think they should watch it if they're as opposed to just listening to it?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say experience this film. Like, watching just seems so basic. This is something that you, whether you're staring at the blue screen or not, this is something you are experiencing. I think, this is hard. I think it depends on the person. Personally, I wouldn't look at the screen at all. I want to be absolutely drowned in the sounds and in the auditory information that's given, and the music and the chorus and the backgrounds, because there is so much layering going on. There's so many sounds. Yeah, and you feel like having that visual would pull focus, even if it is something that's pretty unchanging. I mean, it is just entirely unchanging. Yeah, I think for a person who is very visual and used to watching movies, I would think that it might drive them crazy, because they might be exactly like me. Okay, when's something going to happen? This isn't the whole thing, right?
Like that would be the distracting.
When's something going to happen? Right, just this big old blue screen. Now, however, they could have an experience like you, and something completely different could happen. I guess, no, I went in knowing, what you told me, and that this movie was all about sound. So I was just ready to dump the visuals.
Right.
All I wanted was the sound. But then again, I can perceive blue. I know blue. I know what shades he's talking about. I have a bit of lapis lazuli, which is the throne that he's talking about. So I can see that like deep dark blue with shots of yellow, in my head, and perceive that. But yeah, I don't think he should change anything about it. I think that if you went to this in the theater, or if it was being broadcast, the blue screen should still be there. But I think it's your choice to look. And I think that just having a sea of blue might be really confronting for some people.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think that I would say you're right, that I think it is up to each individual person on how, like, if you are distracted by the fact that nothing is changing on the screen, you don't want to, like, that shouldn't be the thing in your head most of the time.
Right.
But I think that, like, to defend or not to defend, but like I think what you get from watching it, as like especially as a sighted person, is that like experience of having, I mean, in a way, like it is something that is closer to our experiences of like I felt like honing in on the sounds, and I think that by having both simultaneously a visual but also something that your brain is going to completely shut off to, like, because it's not, you don't have, because you're not waiting for something. I mean, ideally you're not waiting for something to happen.
Right.
So I think that like when you're able to be in that place, just having that experience of feeling both, like, I think because it does a great job of like not making you have the blind feeling that's more just how you are so in touch with like imagination and emotion and like the, empathy for the people around you and like envisioning their internal experiences. Like I feel like that is so much of this movie, and instead of it being like, oh, walking down the street, can't hear, can we hear the cars?
Right.
Like we can't see the car. It's not like that kind of blind story. It's the story of the heightened like emotional journey and the heightened like and imagination, I think, too, because I think that can be definitely a part of blindness in general. general, and is something that's still a blind thing available to people who, you know, are just starting to go blind. I think sometimes your imagination can go wild when you're going blind too. So I think that like all those things are kind of, I think the blue screen can heighten that feeling, and so I think that for me that's the way that I would kind of frame it as, you know. I think also just as someone who's going to see a movie, that it is kind of cool to get to put, you know, to assert ourselves as filmmakers, you know, like to assert blind filmmaking and like say that you can still just watch this movie and you are going to like, you know, that is the experience of it. And so for a hearing sighted person, like that you get to like be, you know, it's kind of like you get to enter into our world as blind people.
Oh, totally. I mean, I would 100% go see this in the theater, and I obviously I would want it as is, untouched. I want the blue screen. I want everything, and to hear this on theater speakers, would be so awesome. Yeah, it'd be so intense instead of hearing it on my little, you know, headphones. But this does make me want to try again and watch it on a bigger screen and actually sit there.
Yeah.
And try and just see what happens.
Yeah, you gotta
see how I feel.
You gotta be real. Gotta get it on like a film. Like we should just petition indie theaters to start showing this movie as like a midnight movie or something. Because I feel like also I do love that it is like at many times very just like physical in that, because I mean it's on film, and I know I went to film school. Film is great, but there is something about the just how tangible it feels in it, and that there is like those film spots and imperfections, and that it feels like the color has like actual weight even in the like digital reproductions of it that we're watching. Like you can still feel that weight of like the film of it, and I think that also is something that the entire experience of it, of watching it in a theater, I feel like on film would be really awesome to be able to do that. It almost is like weirdly in my head, I'm like, this is a movie you just really want to see in the theater on film, like more than other movies. Like there is something so like, it just feels like you need to do it. But at the time it's funny because there's I was like looking up stuff. There's one like thing that John Waters wrote about watching this movie.
Oh my God.
And it was so funny.
Oh, I'm scared and yet very, very intrigued.
Oh no, it's all, I mean, of course it's him saying that it's a masterpiece. But it was so funny. The anecdote at the beginning is he was like, there was a big sign outside the movie theater that read, "Warning, this film is only the color blue."
Oh, that's awful.
I was like, talk about a marketing nightmare. Yeah. So, and then he goes on to talk about the blue is as beautiful as a minimalist art piece. Goes on anyway. But I just thought that anecdote was so funny to like, but also kind of just such a specific example of like how people just couldn't handle this as an idea, I feel like, and just so ridiculous.
Right. It's so hard when what a movie is and the language of cinema is so ingrained in people's minds that with Blue and with these experimental films, Blue is obviously the only film like it of its kind, but we know what the language is. We know what to expect when you go to see a movie. And then when something breaks that and fundamentally goes against every single rule, maybe your brain is just, oh my God, I don't feel like processing this right now. This is too much. I think to say this film is only the color blue is a shame. And I think that totally cheapens the experience and drives more people away from the film.
And I think that like
stupid.
it's just it is also, I want those people who are like, because he talks about like that people are like, I want my money back or whatever. It's just, I want those people to who want their money back from a movie being all the color blue. Like they first of all shouldn't get their money back, and second of all, they should maybe think about why they think that that's so important. I mean, like that's a time to reflect maybe about the ticket. People should be like, what do you think about cinema? Like, why do you think that cinema has to have the moving image? Let's ponder this for a while. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But yeah,
and that what that says to me, all these lines of people who wanted their money back. What that says to me is you weren't fucking listening.
Yeah.
Did you listen at all to anything? This amazing director is pouring out his heart and soul. These are parts of him that he might not have shared with anybody else, and these are parts of him that are going to live on after he dies. And you want your fucking money back? Fuck you.
Fuck you. I think we can agree. Fuck you. Well, I mean, it's also like, to me, I'm just like, we did silent film for how many, like, you know, decades, and then there's still like, you know, it's like kind of cool for people to do silent film still now, but no one goes and sees the silent film and it's like, there was no dialogue, I want my money back, because I couldn't hear people talking. Like, it is just this kind of weird double standard of, you know, why does film just doesn't have to just be like images. Like, there's this idea that film has to just be images, as that's the defining feature, which I feel like is really problematic, because it's also just like such a it makes film, it really cheapens filmmaking to me, like, to think that it has to have like moving images. That's the only thing, which I don't know.
To say that film, you're putting film in a box essentially, and you're putting filmmakers in a box. You have to speak this language, you have to understand this language. Well, this filmmaker doesn't speak that language and doesn't perceive film like we would anymore.
Right.
So why force him to make something like that?
Right. Well, and it's like, I think the sad thing for me too is I think about, like, you know, this movie was the final film of a director who, you know, was cited for most of his life.
Sure.
And I think that this movie was kind of something that, like, I think it was difficult for him to get funded, and then also difficult as a way of, like, as the way it was presented. And, you know, and then it was his final film. So I do think, like, for a blind director who is not, you know, doesn't start their career sighted, is born blind, or like goes blind at a young age. There's a sense of like, movies are not for you. Like, you can't actually make movies. It's something that, like, this is sort of a tangent, but like, I am going back to school, starting to like get ready to go back to school, and I realized I had gone to film school, and now I'm going to school majoring in psychology. And I was talking like to the Disability Resource Center, and I realized that part of the reason why I had so much trouble when I was getting my film degree. I had so much trouble getting textbooks. I basically never got to graduate because it was so hard for me. And then in psychology classes, it was like most of the textbooks are already available and that the Disability Resource Center has already made blind copies for them. And I realized it's like blind people aren't film majors. I was the first blind person that was a film major at that school, and that's why I never really got the accommodations. I didn't even get to graduate because I was getting my textbooks at week 8 out of 10.
Well, I mean, blind people, not to totally interrupt you, if I may go on my own little tangent also, as far as I know, I am the first and only blind theater graduate from my university. Yeah, because theater is such a visual medium. I mean, you have other elements of theater, of course, but theater is so visual. And there were a couple of classes, mostly lighting, that I flat out couldn't take. And, you know, my professor, who was very nice. All of my theater professors were awesome. And I had actually taken my sound design class and set and scenic design, stagecraft with the same professor, because our department was very small. And he, you know, came to me and was like, look, I know you're thinking about taking lighting, but I don't think this would work. You know, I physically, as a professor, just don't know how to teach this to you.
Right.
And I physically, as a student who had never taken that class, didn't know what adaptions to ask for.
Right. Well, that you can't be expected to just like do it all yourself. Like, it's just like, why aren't you paying me to run this fucking department if I have to like figure it from ground up? Like, what am I paying you for at that point?
So it was kind of a blessing, because that gave me the opportunity to like take some supplemental film classes, which our film head teacher is just amazing, and I adore her, and I would do anything for her. She's incredible, and she totally let me take a couple of her classes. And I also got to take Alaska Native Performing Arts with her as well. Oh, nice. And for our final performance in that class, we had to do something that was culturally relevant to us. So some people, we actually had some Native Alaskan folks in our class. So some people danced, some people sang, some people made a slideshow. I mean, there was no limit to what you could do. So I wrote a piece about sight and the way I see and being blind. And I was like, okay, there's one more element I want to add to this project. So I blindfolded everyone.
Nice.
I got a bunch of sleeve shades, and I passed them out to the theater, to the crowd who'd come to watch. Wasn't a very big crowd, but who had come to watch our performances. And I made them all wear blindfolds, and those that couldn't, I asked them to like close their eyes. And I did it that way, and everyone loved it.
Yeah.
It was a great final piece, and it was mine. And I got to do it the way I wanted to do it, and I got to speak the language I wanted to speak.
Right. And having that, like, and I just feel like there'd be so much more of that if we were felt like we could have space in these communities, like art communities of theater and film. I feel like both of them, we have to like just at every step of the way, we're just like, you know, kicking, and like it's just like it's so fucking hard to do anything. And I think that really, it stops all this creative energy from ever getting realized, because you're
just told you can't, or where there's no room for you, or why don't you try it this way, or you know, it's why you're asking us to be creative, so let us create on our own terms. Basically reiterating what you're saying, but exactly, let us do this the way we want to do it. And you know what, it's going to come out weird, and it's going to be unconventional, and it's probably going to be something you've never seen or experienced, but it's going to be us.
And who doesn't want their art to be something that is something they've never seen or experienced?
And watching this film, honestly, it made me want to try this again.
Yeah.
I want to make a soundscape and write a poem, or find old journal entries, or do something. Now, my interpretation of this film would look completely different from Derek's film, but I think that would be magical, and you know, who knows?
Yeah,
it would be different and beautiful.
Well, and I think this is almost, you know, just kind of a bridge point, like, because I think the stuff that we could make would have a completely different, I really do think it would be taking it another step into a direction of, like, you know, like a great creativity, and like actually like representing the blind experience through like access to these art forms. I think that we can bring it another step further. And then he still is a sighted person who's recently lost his vision, you know, and made films from a sighted perspective before. And I think that perspective is really so it's very deep within this movie, and is like, that is what this movie represents. But I think that you can take that a step further of being like, what is the experience of a blind person, and how do we show our own experiences from a place of identity, and like that is who we are, in a way that I think this movie celebrates. I mean, in a lot of ways it does celebrate more being a gay man, how like that's who you are, but it doesn't the blindness. I think some of the stuff with like talking about the blindness is not like, when in the literal terms there is about like blindness being like a loss, and like, you know, the kind of more from the perspective of someone who's losing their sight after many years of having it, or most of their, you know, their life up until then having it. And I think that's a different perspective.
And you compare this to Going Blind, the documentary we watched fairly recently, and it's two totally different sides of the coin. I mean, in Going Blind, our journalist is trying so hard to keep his vision, and he's going to try everything, anything. He wants to exhaust all of the options. And then you have Blue, which is a story of death and acceptance and HIV/AIDS, absolutely, but he's also accepting of his blindness and celebrating it. Honestly, it's about writing about Blue. It's poetry, it's metaphor, it's simile, it's beautiful language. And granted, if this were made by a person who was completely blind and couldn't, you know, what is blue? What does the sight of blue mean? Well, it would mean something totally different, because they can't perceive what blue is. But blue is, this is what blue sounds like. This is what blue feels like. This is what blue makes you think of. I mean, it's rapturous in its phrasing.
I mean, I think it's also kind of cool to like, I think framing blindness, just because of a lot of the misconceptions on like the, you know, some sort of universal blind experience. I think having it like framed around the color blue, and that we see just a blue screen, it's like a representation of both something so not visual, while at the same time like celebrating that blindness a lot of times has a big visual component as well. Like, you know, that for the vast majority of blind people there is a visual component to blindness, and you know, and we're not a monolithic group in the way that we see the world. We're actually an extremely diverse group, even in our visual perceptions specifically. But I think like to do a story that's so much about blindness, but also is centered around a color, which is, you know, such a, it is like a visual thing. I think I do kind of, I like that combination of like showing how blindness is not just about, it's like simultaneously like, oh, not just I'm going to do a radio piece because that's the most specific thing to a blind person, is like just sound, but it's also taking something, you know, framing the entire film around a color, and then having such a rich audio experience on top of that. But like, I think that I like that combination of like the visual aspects of blindness, as well as the you know, every other sense that we have, all the other senses we have as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's really just that this, you know, this movie comes at at someone who is, you know, basically knows that they are going to die soon, and I think that that is a different kind of vision loss than someone who's born with, you know, like, I think for us blindness is about life, and like for people who are, you know, for whatever reason going blind near the end of their life, that it's about death. And so it's like it's the symbolism is very different in a way that it's but I think that even with that, he doesn't fall into the same, you know, kind of like fatalistic things that you sometimes hear from people who are going blind at an older age, where it's like, oh, I'm just about to die or whatever, you know, instead of like seeing it as something that's not necessarily, you know, the worst fate. Like, I think that he still has, he doesn't view blindness in the most like apocalyptic way at all. I think that, but it has the symbolism it carries with it. I think it was probably just really just actually different to him than it would have been to us, because it isn't, you know, it isn't a core identity in the same way it would be for us. So I think
the touchstone kind of that I kept coming back to, that this reminded me of, and I'm sure I've mentioned this once already on another episode, but it's one of the last interviews that Radiolab did with Oliver Sacks, and he talks about having cancer and knowing that he didn't have much longer left in the in this world, and so he talks about like taking mushrooms and getting incredibly high and experiencing indigo.
Oh,
the color indigo. So his wasn't necessarily the color blue, but it was indigo, and he said it felt like this sphere of indigo that I was seeing was completely alive and was its own being, and it felt like spirit, and I don't want to say heaven because he wasn't necessarily a religious person in that sense, but it felt alive. Everything he needed was contained in this sphere of indigo, and looking into it, he felt safer, and he saw acceptance there.
Yeah.
It's a very short piece. It's beautiful. It's absolutely amazing, and I'm horribly paraphrasing his words because his speech was much more eloquent than mine, but that's what I thought of.
Yeah, I mean, that's
what came to mind.
That is really, wow, that is a fascinating parallel though, of like looking at this movie, and and also I'm colorblind, so is indigo, how similar is it to blue?
Oh, indigo is so hard for me too, because I have a lot of trouble with it. Indigo is like right smack dab in the middle between blue and purple.
Okay.
So it's
because this movie is a very blue. It's like sky blue, I think.
Almost. It's darker than sky blue, but not as dark as royal blue. And there's not enough purple in it to be indigo. I also perceive color fairly well.
Nice.
Yeah, but
you have the indigo, color vision on the podcast.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. Indigo is like blue, but there's more purple in it.
Okay. So yeah, it definitely is, but it is a similar color to this blue, even if it's not. It wouldn't. The blue in this movie it does feel like, I mean, and this means nothing coming from a colorblind person, but it does have that feeling of a color that is distinctly the color of blue. Like, you know, it doesn't feel like it's at the crossroads of any other color. It feels like a very blue, but again, I'm a colorblind person, so this is kind of, you know, meaningless. If you really can see colors, you might as well just see the movie and not listen to what I have to say about it. But I am sky, so maybe I have some authority to blue, but
maybe sky. I think true sky blue, and I mix up sky blue and robin's egg blue all the time, but I think true sky blue to you might look almost white. Like it is.
Oh yeah. Because I can't tell when there's clouds in the sky or when it's a cloudless day. I can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
So,
I'm probably mixing up sky blue and robin's egg blue. Anyway, not important. There are so many shades of blue.
There's a lot of shades of blue. Maybe even more than 50 if you wanted to.
Honestly, I saw something on Facebook that someone had like created a new shade of blue. So
that they're always doing that these days.
Yeah.
Although you could do 50 Shades of Blue, it'd be like BDSM, but really sad because it was during the HIV epidemic. And
oh God, no! It's just this like sub-dom relationship, but like one or both parties are just real sad.
It would be very. Probably just a very odd mixture of two contents if we should mix this movie with 50 Shades of Grey. I definitely, as I've seen at least the first movie, 50 Shades of Grey, and I will definitely tell you, if you only have time to see one movie, definitely see Blue.
Oh God, please. Also, this film is so easy to access. All you need is a library card, and it's right there for you. Yeah, library cards are free, folks.
Yeah,
and they're so easy to get, especially right now where a lot of people are still having to stay home.
Yeah, get your library card. Get on Canopy, watch this movie. Do we want to do ratings? Do we have things we want to talk about before we do? Okay. I think we like The Color of Paradise. So really, I'm on a color kick of like really actually good movies for once. Kick of color movies that, from the 90s. Very specific genre. We'll start by caveating this by saying like, you should watch this movie as well. Definitely just see the movie.
Totally recommending it. Yeah.
Now,
absolutely.
I guess with this one, I think that you could hear our conversation. I don't think hearing our conversation before watching it would ruin the film necessarily.
No,
I think you can kind of watch it. You can watch it before you listen. You can watch it after. I think it's just, I mean, we've both seen it multiple times now, so it is just worth watching whenever you watch it. But... what if you turned it on mute and played it while you're listening to this podcast? Then I guess
there you go.
But you should probably go back and actually watch it. But maybe we should just say this podcast, you also should the rule for listening to the podcast is you should mute the movie and just watch the blue screen just so you can have the experience while listening to this podcast as well as when actually watching the movie. Anyway, enough of my stupid...
Or if you have vision, just look up.
Yeah. Well, on a uncloudy day.
On an uncloudy day.
Yeah.
Today is a little cloudy.
So,
but still.
But there's a lot of ways of enjoying this movie. Melissa, do you want to go first with your rating?
Sure. Oh my goodness. Easy, very easy. 2,800.
Nice. That's mine too, actually.
Good. Oh, we tied. Yay! This is it's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece. This film is incredible, and you should just get on Canopy and go watch it because it needs to be seen. It needs to be talked about more as in the LGBTQ community and also in the disabled community. This film should be shown more. It should be lauded more. It should absolutely be talked about. And I'm pretty sure out of all of my friends, except for you, I'm the only person who knows about this movie.
Yeah.
And
you didn't even a few days ago.
You're right. I just learned about this movie a few days ago. Yeah. And I can't wait to tell people, if you are interested in film and especially what film can be, this movie is mandatory.
What film Canopy on Canopy? No.
Hey! No. So Blue gets a 2,800.
Nice. Well, I'm also giving it that 2,800. I think definitely agree. And just also you should just watch it. I mean, I don't know if it's like just a historical note of like, it's so important not to forget that we went through this, and as a world, and it is still something that, affects a lot of people, but also the stigma as well, is something that has always led to the most death and suffering. But just a little PSA as well, that we have gone to a point where we can treat HIV/AIDS and not to stigmatize people who have it.
Right.
I'm like trying to. I've said this multiple times now, but I am also struggling to because I think that this movie is a masterpiece, and it's not like the problem with this movie is it doesn't know that in 2021 we had. It's a completely different situation. But just I think that's just a weird sort of thing that I think is. Just disabled people of all different, reasons for being disabled. I think that we can do a lot more to love and accept people into our society and find ways that people can live, long lives with, the suffering that's we reducing suffering where we can, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, just go watch the movie. I mean, we've talked a lot about our thoughts on it. So just watch it now. Okay, we're closing the chapter on Blue, and we are opening the book on another chapter that's not from the 90s, Melissa?
Yes, it's not from the 90s. Next week on the podcast, we're going to be watching the 2016 classic, My Blind Brother.
Yes, I think it's going to be the same as Blue, right?
Oh, exactly the same. We will have exactly the same emotional, well-rounded experience. No questions asked. I think Nick Kroll and Jenny Slate are going to give that to us. Absolutely. And Adam
I
Scott.
like Nick Kroll.
Yep. I do.
Yeah,
I do
they're
like
all
all of them. So
yeah, I like all of them too.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, this will be fun. I hope it's not like us, like very ableist and makes us sad because we like the people involved. So that is my one concern, but we'll see what happens. Tune in next week to find out.
Yes.
But I thank you so much for taking us out of the 90s because we've had a very interesting and good run, I think. But for an entire month of the 90s, I think we're ready to get out of the 90s for a little bit. What were you blindsided by this week, Melissa?
Yes. What was I blindsided by this week?
I know this day. It's really, you're like this movie.
I was thinking about it. I was thinking about what I was going to say as I was coming home.
Here. Weren't you blindsided, to use blindsided in a different way than we usually use it? Do you want to tell the story of what happened to you today?
Oh, that's what I was going to do. Yes, let's do that. I like that plan. That's great. Okay, so I was blindsided today by almost not getting my COVID-19 vaccine.
Shame.
Actually, yeah, the absolute shame. The medical clinic that I go to is super awesome, and I love them. They are a low-income clinic, and they're great. Without them, I would probably not be here anymore. So they texted me on Friday night and was like, hey, we're setting up a partnership with this other place, and we're going to have a vaccine available. And you just have to register and sign up to get an appointment. And on the website, it did say this is a drive-through situation. So I knew that going in. And of course, obviously, I don't drive a car. But I was like, I'm going to show up anyway because I'm a patient with my clinic, and they said that it's open to their patients. So I was like, screw it. I need the vaccine. I'm going to get it. So I go this morning, and luckily it wasn't too far from my house, actually. So I go this morning to get the shot. I show up, and I see the cars and the tents and everything where they're poking people. And the ladies at the table are like, hey, do you have an appointment? And I'm like, yeah, actually I do. Da-da-da. And, they see the fact that obviously I didn't pull up in a freaking car. So they're like, hey, so one of them tries to tell me, hey, this is a drive-through vaccine only. You can't get the vaccine without a car.
Boo.
Yeah. And I was like, no, we're not doing this today. I'm a patient at my medical clinic. They invited me here today. I registered, I set up an appointment to get the vaccine. I'm not leaving here without the shot.
And it's not your fucking fault you can't drive.
Right. I'm like, I've tried everywhere in Portland. I've been checking the pharmacies. I've been calling people, and I have not been able. Yeah. And for the past 2.5, almost 3 weeks, I have not been able to get a vaccine. So she's like, okay, well, let me just go back and check. Like, okay, you do that. All right, bye. So she came back after about 5 minutes or 5-10 minutes and was like, hey, so we've decided to make an exception for you. And I'm like, cool. Great. I should have never had to go through this bullshit in the first place.
You shouldn't need a fucking exception for just being like a person that can't drive or doesn't have access to a car. That shouldn't be a fucking exception. You need it to be equitable. You have to have actual things in place for that, and you definitely should not be framing it as a fucking exception.
Right.
Ugh.
And then she's like, well, you know about the one at the airport, right? That's especially for disabled people. And I was like, disabled people who drive or who have access to cars. I don't have access to a car. Now, yes, I have access to friends who have cars, but
it's like
I'm
you
a
shouldn't
stubborn
have
asshole,
to.
and, you know.
No, but
No,
like
I
you
shouldn't
really
have
shouldn't
to.
have to. And if something's gonna
No.
be equitable and even try to pretend to be equitable, you should never make disabled people rely on other people to get, like, especially fucking medical care that they desperately need right now, you know,
Right.
or like just things that are going to help ensure that they are alive. Like that you shouldn't have to fucking find a friend to be able to get that when other people just have access to it without needing
Right,
to like
exactly.
rely on anyone else. It's
Exactly.
not
And
fair.
I was like, yeah, and I was like, they have plenty of staff there. There wasn't the whole time I was there, I think maybe 5 or 6 cars came by because they had everything in appointments. So you showed up when your appointment time happened. So it wasn't like they were backed up with like 50 cars, you know.
Right.
There was a few cars, and all they did was sit me in a chair and then have someone come over, help me fill out the paperwork, and then poke me and send me on my way.
And it's just
No time at all.
And it's like, what are they? It doesn't even make any sense that you need to have cars. I mean, like, there are plenty of vaccine sites where they're not drive-thrus. It's not like there's anything about getting the vaccine that has to be like everyone in their own little cars. Like, you know, the
Right,
pharmacies
right.
have figured out how to do it without cars.
Yeah. Well, I think she was just like, well, this is a specific site. It's a drive-through vaccination site.
But
so
it's where you could get an
specifically for cars.
appointment. You could
Sure.
fucking get an appointment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I said to her. I was like, this is the only appointment I've been able to get.
And-
Give me the shot. I'm getting the shot.
Yeah.
So
like, you
luckily-
did the work of fucking getting there. Like,
Right,
they should
right.
be
I was like, you know,
fucking
I got
thankful.
here.
You know?
Yeah. So, you know, luckily nobody had to get mean. I didn't have to get mean or anything. I just, you know, they gave me the shot. Now, if I was already making a backup plan for like, what if they wouldn't give it to me? Well, I guess I'm calling Wallace, and I'll just have my fucking doctor get on the phone and be like, yeah, give her the fucking shot.
Yeah, and like also write to the Willamette Weekly or something, being like, fucking
Yeah.
shit, this is what happened to me. Because it's like
Yep.
actually fucked up. But yeah, I'm
Right, and I'm
glad
like-
they fucking, you know, in the end, it sounds like a story that was sort of like, was basically real discrimination, but also in the end, you weren't refused. Like, it could have been worse, but still, that's fucked up. Like, just to begin with.
Yeah, no, it was all sorts of fucked up. But in the end, I got the shot. And now my arm hurts. So I
Nice.
know I got the shot.
Yes, that's how you know you got the shot, which is why the first time that I got mine, I was like, I didn't get it. It didn't
Yeah.
hurt. But apparently Pfizer hurts less than Moderna, but then Moderna, you're less likely to have flu symptoms. Very weird. Not really sure why that would
Yeah.
be true, but that's just
To-
the statistics.
Yeah, to clarify, I got the Moderna vaccine. So
So in a
yeah.
month, you'll get your second dose. Do you have an
Woo,
appointment
woo.
yet?
I have not set up an appointment yet, but I'm going to be doing that. Yeah.
Nice. Well, by the time
That's
this
the next
airs,
thing.
you're actually going to be getting the vaccine. Your second
I-
appointment not too soon.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, because we'll be airing in 2.5 weeks, so you'll be even more immune by the time you're hearing this to your listener. I mean, I wanted to give extra time for you to tell that story. Do you want to just leave it at that, since we had one day in between episodes, and I really just wanted to make sure you got to tell that story on the podcast?
If you're comfortable with it, that's fine.
Okay, I am totally happy to yield my time to your story of
I'm
dumbness.
reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time.
Yes. Definitely, I don't know. What is the moral of this episode? Just don't fuck over disabled people during a pandemic. It happens every time,
Yeah.
but like, just stop. Just like, stop doing
Don't
that.
do that.
Yeah, we're done. We don't like it.
That's it. Yeah.
That's the moral of
Help
the
us out.
podcast.
Show a little compassion. Yeah.
Yeah. We are people too, it turns out. Our theme song is by Lucia Fasano. Our YouTube is Citizen White Cane Podcast. Our Twitter is White Cane Pod. Our Instagram and our Facebook are both Citizen White Cane. And our email is citizenwhitecanepod@gmail.com. If you'd like to leave us a voice message, there's a link in the show notes. How many times did you watch Blue after seeing it, if you've seen it before?
Do you agree with John Waters and agree that people who want their money back should go fuck off?
Yeah, and us also. We all think that. And what would be another way of a non-visual film or theater thing that you've heard about or experienced or would love to make someday? You can let us know any of that. Link in the show notes. And rate the podcast, give us a review, and subscribe to get all the new episodes. And come back next week for my blind
brother.
We'll see. We'll see if it's. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Or maybe we won't because we're blind. Anyway. Yep. Bye.
Bye. Wow.